and welcome to The Black Unconscious,
a mental health podcast about living, coping, and thriving while Black.
I'm Raquel Martin, a PhD candidate in medical and clinical psychology.
And I'm Dr. Justin Hopkins, a licensed clinical psychologist.
This podcast is not meant to be a substitute for a therapeutic relationship with a licensed therapist.
Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the show. Hey, and welcome to The Black Unconscious. We are your hosts. I am Dr. Justin Hopkins.
And I am Raquel Martin.
And this is episode 12 entitled, Who Wears the Pants? Gender Norms. So today we're going to be talking about gender norms and essentially breaking down the difference between sex and gender, understanding how gender norms are defined in today's culture, and also looking at some of the expectations, some of the gendered expectations specifically within the Black community.
Yeah. So what do you want to start with? The title.
Yeah. Raquel, you want to put
I picked the title.
She did.
Because I like triggering titles.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think the title embodies a gender norm, right? The idea of who wears the pants. I mean, it's a common idiom that's been used about power dynamics in relationships.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing with gender norms is that the biggest concern I think is the power aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So the who wears the pants thing makes me think about that in relationships. It makes me think about that in businesses and basically every single walk of life and how it impacts you.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting that like that phrase, right? It says like who wears the pants, not who wears the dress, who wears the skirt, who wears the blouse. I really think this idea of wearing the pants being representative of who has the power actually does embody the idea of a gender norm and also the patriarchal power distribution within our society.
Yeah, because women didn't used to wear pants. Quick Google, it wasn't until like the 1920s and 30s that women started actually wearing pants. So the default for anything is normally male, right?
Right.
Like in most languages, and in Spanish, I always remember thinking it was crazy that if it was a female ended in A, if it was a male it ended in O, but if there was one male in the group, like it was, say it's 1,000 females and there's one male in the group, it ends in an O.
Right.
Because the male automatically takes over it. So everything always defaults to men.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's get into it. Well, for starters, I mean, let's outline some of the basics. What's the difference between sex and gender?
So sex is only biological. Like it's only your sex organs.
Right.
That's it. So it's just basically penis versus vagina. That's it.
Or intersex.
Yeah, or intersex.
As a third, right.
As a third, but that's it. So gender is more of, it's the behavior or attribute that society has attributed to a certain sex. Like it's not based in biology. It's only developed according to society. And because of that, there's a difference in the amount of expectations for men versus women in different societies,
right,
gender-wise.
Right. So for gender, right, gender is enforced by culture. There's a larger spectrum for gender. For example, that's why someone can be cisgendered or transgendered or identify as neither, as not part of the gender binary.
Yeah, and that's why I think a lot of times when people think of privilege, they totally miss the aspect of being a cisgendered person. I have so much privilege being a cisgendered person.
Right. My
sex organs match with the way I identify in society. So that's a privilege in itself, because if you are transgender, there's so many difficulties that come with it. Transgender population have more higher prevalence of depression, anxiety, suicide, basically every mental health issue.
Right.
Higher prevalence rate.
Right. And part of that is because, one, how ostracized and marginalized they are by others in society. If you think about it, part of the privilege of being a cisgender person, as you mentioned, is having your biology match up with how you feel, your subjective experience of yourself, and both your sex and your gender. Also, what that does is that allows who you are to match up to some degree, depending. I mean, there's always variability, but I think there's less of a disagreement between what people's expectations are of you and the pressures that people put on you and the demands, I think, to conform to a certain cookie cutter way, to a certain particular norm. And what that does is it really does make it easier to be you.
Yeah, I think anything that's not the default will cause stress.
Yes.
We'll have a significant, we'll have more work towards it. It may not be stressful. We'll have to work harder. So men are automatically the default. So women most of the time have more, work to do with a certain aspect, or when it comes to identity versus your identity. So you automatically get defaulted to cisgendered. So individuals who are not cisgendered have to work harder. Even on a basic level of like handedness, like right hand versus left hand, like everything defaults to right handedness. Like when kids are like cutting with scissors, you got to buy special scissors to cut with. Even when they're sitting in desks, they have to be sitting in different desks.
That's the first thing that came to mind. Like those left-handed desks come at a premium, but I think that's a good example of
in race, because we're not the default for race either, and we have to work harder.
Right. I think that's a good. I think that's a good example of how, like, to some degree, like how privilege is manifested. Right. Like if you're not the default, then obviously, maintaining a level of wellness that feels comfortable for yourself is going to have more challenges because of how society doesn't naturally make space for you or welcome you. So, how do gender norms form? I mean, I think that's a really important question, because I think that helps us to understand like how gender norms differ via culture and differ between relationships, differ between families. And so it obviously really starts at birth. We know that, these are some of the stereotypes like across the gender binary, right? The girls wear pink, boys wear blue. Girls play with dolls, boys play with trucks or action figures. And so there are all these, even when you're really little, there are these things that your parents, your family, or society tells you, like, these are the behaviors or things that you should like. These are the things that you should be. These are the things that you should aim for. And these are the things that you should put aside because you're not you're not identified as by others as being able to play with these sort of things or to like these sort of things or to be these sort of things. It's just not attributed to who you are.
Yeah, it even starts in utero, actually. There has been research, I do not recall the study, but there has been research that when women are pregnant, once they know the sex of their child, they use different nouns in a different tone of voice when they're addressing their baby. And the partner does as well. So it doesn't just start with like when they come out of the womb. It starts in utero when it comes to that, or different nouns when there was a study when they put babies in pink versus blue, and same baby. It was the same baby, but put them in pink versus blue, and looked at the nouns that they used. Like, oh, he's handsome and he looks so strong in the blue, and then the pink, oh, she looks so delicate and adorable. But it's the same baby. So it's just like. Just think about how much your expectations, even just the words that you use or the tone that they use, just me in pink versus blue, just attribute it to what you identify their gender to be. I mean,
and we also know that words shape development.
Yes.
And the things that we say about our children, especially when they're at a very, very, very young age, even pre-verbal, like you said, even before they're born, there are certain words that we use or certain ways that we interact with children that really does shape them in that particular way. The idea of calling a boy strong versus a woman delicate, and then so automatically the woman would then or the girl would then face some sort of internal opposition or external opposition to maybe taking on more of a strong identity.
Yeah, because who the freak wants to be delicate? Like, I'm not some kind of like lace doily. Like, like what? Just when you think of like you would want to be strong, right? Like your parents are big and they're strong. Your dad's big and he's strong. Like, what happens with delicate things? They break. Like, they have to be taken more care of. You can't really take them out that often. Like, what are those figurines that a lot of people have? Those are delicate. They're in a case in somebody's house, in somebody's grandma's house, most likely, because they're delicate. But when it comes to, you can do more stuff when you're strong. You get to like play more. It just changes your thought process of stuff that you might be able to do.
Right. And the psychodynamic school of thought, we have this word called self-object. And it's kind of how it sounds, except object really just means like somebody else, usually a figure that's been in your life really, really early. So it could be your mom or your dad or your big brother or big sister, or little brother, little sister, cousins, even whoever was around you very early on. And they use that term basically to say like the self object or self so-and-so, whoever that other person is, to basically say that our internal dialogue and our psychology is very much shaped by the people around us. And Raquel, I'm sure you've had this experience when you're talking to patients, and some of their self-talk or the words that they say to themselves, the thoughts that they have, sound a certain way. And usually that internal voice is someone else's voice. It's become part of yours, so it's part self, but it's also part other. Hence the idea of like self-object or self-other, self. It's part self, but it's also part the other person. And so it's basically this idea that these voices that we hear from our family members, from the people that we love, absolutely do become a part of our psychology. It's not just something that we hear. It's something that intimately shapes who we are and how we think of ourselves. It becomes a part of our psychology.
Not even just children, but a lot of stuff comes from media, right? Like the representation of things come from media. So there's been a lot of studies that talk about with children, a lot of their ideas on like what females can achieve or males can achieve, or typical like jobs or clothing or behaviors are based off of media, which is why representation matters so much for everyone. But like for women, for young ladies, seeing women being able to be CEOs or and stuff like that, or even especially for Black men and Black women, I always talk about representation in the way of like what they feel like they can achieve. Like when I'm working with young women and young men and they have more self-concept issues, identity issues, one of the activities I actually do with them is I bring in all my like Essence and Oprah and Ebony magazines, and we make like a vision box. It's just same as a vision board, but it's a vision box because all of the tools and stuff that we learn in therapy we put in the box. So it's always like really positive stuff and stuff that they want to achieve. And it's just a simple task because a lot of times they do not get to see themselves in a positive light. And just that simple task helps them like, okay, well, if you're feeling negative about yourself, or if you're having a moment and you feel like something is going wrong, did you go look in your vision box? Do you have like your stress ball? Do you have your like favorite CD? It's not CDs anymore. That reminds you of like calming music. And you know, like representation always matters, and it matters like that in gender too. Being able to see women as something more than a princess, as something more than someone to be saved is something. Being able to see like a young man or something on TV who's able to talk about mental health and is not afraid to cry, like that takes away the stereotype of the fact that like men or little boys aren't able to cry and that girls are only able to be like taken care of. Like all of that starts from representation, not only of media, but also of what you see your parents doing. Because a lot of stuff happens from modeling. A lot of stuff happens from the way children see people engage, and adults as well. So it's representation will always matter in terms of all children, but especially Black children. Because think about as adults how we feel when we walk into primarily white spaces. Your children feel this, like not always, but there can be a possibility that children can feel a different way with that too. Like if they're going to a school that most children don't look like them, or they're engaged in extra activities and most children don't look like them, representation always matters.
Absolutely.
And it really just works on with their development, especially with gender, because I think when they're little, I think males and females are treated differently. Like the episode where we talked about Black boy growth, and we talked about like a lot of times boys weren't taught, you know, to be able to talk about certain things and feelings like that. But that grows, and they grow into men, right? Some of them, not all of them. Some of them, because you know the difference between, but the girls too. Like the difference between girls and women and men and boys is not the age at all. It's a developmental thing. It's like where your stage is. Because there are girls my age and there are women my age, and there are boys my age and men my age. Like it's really about how you are as a person. I wasn't saying just men. It's women too. Okay. I'm just saying. But well, I think that happens with gender norms, like with like expectations on boys versus girls. Like girls are always supposed to be seen, or like likely seen as caregivers, right? Yes. And like, so how do we expect all this from men or boys when we don't teach them that? Like, how can we expect you to express your feelings and you don't know them? And it's because that's in your gender stereotype. Absolutely, absolutely. I love that we're talking about this because I feel like there's so many complicated things to dissect and to pull apart here. I think in particular, men are
raised with this idea of being strong, being emotionally reserved, being withdrawn, being impenetrable, invincible, like you can't be affected, you can't be hurt. As a man, you're supposed to work hard. Your masculinity is associated with toughness and resilience, and nothing impacts you. And from an early age, we're told, not to cry. I think it's the saddest thing. It is the saddest thing to witness a mother or a father tell a 2-year-old boy, don't cry.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have we heard the thing? And we're getting into some of the specifically like Black gender norms. How many times have you heard just in Black Twitter probably knows this very well, right? Like when a parent says, and I think parents have said this to both genders, but stop crying or else I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah, which is the dumbest. What? It's the dumbest statement ever. But yeah, I have heard that multiple times.
Right. And specifically for boys, crying is weak. Showing emotion. I mean, anything that has to do with being hurt or having an emotion, we're told not to. So another thing that boys are told is don't be like women. You're better than a woman. Don't be like a woman, right? Don't throw like a girl. Don't talk like a girl. Don't do anything like a girl.
Yeah, or even I hear plenty of men say, "Don't act like a bitch." Don't be a little bitch about this, cause just take your hits and keep it on moving.
Right, and then we wonder why the only way our guys at Let's Talk Bro talk about this quite often, Kier and Jeremy, and another podcast that we love. They're really breaking down toxic masculinity, and they talk about how do guys make friends? How do we interact with other people if we're not supposed to show any emotion? We're not supposed to be hurt or vulnerable. How do you connect? What is intimacy then if you can't be vulnerable? What is love if you can't open up? What is closeness? What is a bond really if as a man you're supposed to be this army of one with this really tough armor that doesn't ever really get impacted or down or upset by anything? That's not real relationship. That's not real connectedness. That's not real intimacy. And I think that's also not real personal fulfillment. But we learned that at a very early age. We're told this is what a man looks like. And I'm so grateful that we're trying to walk some of that back. But and some of the misogyny and patriarchy that is obviously instilled in boys at such a young age by telling them, don't be like a girl, don't do this like a girl. I'm glad some of that stuff is being walked back, but for so many of us, we're really told to be more like a robot that's just not human. And I think a lot of us have really struggled because of that.
Yeah, and I think you get to a good point of the aspect of gender stereotypes. So there's a bunch of different factors of gender stereotypes. There's within personality traits, there's within domestic behaviors, there's within occupations, physical appearance, and then internal things. So the first thing you talked about was more so that the attitudes and the beliefs and the different types of thinking of men when it comes to the way that they're reared, the way that they're told to act. So to be more stoic, to be more, self-confident, to not really ask for help as much, to try to be more aggressive in certain ways. And
not asking for help is a big one.
Not asking for help is one thing. And for women, it could also be that women are supposed to be more accommodating to certain things. They're supposed to be more emotional to certain things. But it gets different, I think, when it comes to Black women, because I think there's always there is a stereotype of Black women as the angry Black woman, or the one who's supposed to take care of stuff and handle everything, and then the accommodating aspect is not what I think of when I hear about a Black female stereotype. Not accommodating at all. It's more so get stuff done, Black superwoman syndrome, get stuff done, take care of you, your child, your man, and then suck it up, and then still have some kind of aspect of self-care, and don't complain about it. Just do it, because this is what we do. This is what we're supposed to do, so you just do it.
Right.
It's Nike. Shout outs to Nike.
Shout outs to Nike
for giving Colin a job. That's what's up. I'm definitely changing my lanyard at work to a Nike lanyard.
Yeah, I mean that ad they put together was absolutely amazing. I mean, Speaking of gender norms as well, they also have Serena on there, who, she's literally the best athlete in the world.
In the world.
There are
And she defies stereotypes with her body. Like if we talk about physical appearance, like her physical appearance is what everyone would expect a female because she's more muscular.
Right.
But she's an athlete, so she has to be.
But speaking of which, like I do think to connect the dots a bit here, like I do think, the things that have been said about Serena, specifically her body and her style of play, right? It's as if people do not see her as being human and don't think it affects her at all. And I think similarly, right, when you were talking about the black woman stereotype of being the superwoman, cater to everyone, put yourself last, and take care of yourself at some point, so that you can keep taking care of the rest of us, and do it graciously and with a smile. Oh, and any time that you express any sort of discomfort or upset feelings about any of this, well, then you're just too angry now. You're
too angry. And then James Baldwin,
our guy,
he's amazing. Our guy, he's cool. Fist bump. So it talks about to be, what is it, conscious, and to be
black and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage
all the time. When I'm dealing with, I had a patient that they were given to me, and he was a black male teenager, and they were just concerned about his aggression level, and they were more so well, what could this stem from? And I kind of swiveled my chair and well, it could stem from a lot of things. It could stem from them being in a neighborhood that's really rough, having to put on a facade all the time and not being able to express their feelings. It could stem from them watching the news and seeing people that look like them get killed. There's a lot of reasons to be angry.
Yeah.
There are a lot of reasons to be angry, but it's also easy to be angry.
Yes, as a black person, there's a lot of
reasons to be angry. But I always think, what are you going to do with the anger? I manifest my anger through venting sometimes. But also the reason why I chose psychology is because I wanted to help out my community that way. I feel if you do not have an outlet, or the anger or being able to contribute to your community, because I think that's the ultimate goal is to contribute to your community. And when I say community, with me, I mean black people. And with me, that's always working in community mental health. I always do.
Right.
Half my patients are coming in for free, no health insurance, all that. That's how I contribute to it. But I can see why people are upset.
I really liked I really liked something that Jamel Hill said. Anyone who doesn't know Jamel Hill, she is one of the very few black female anchors on ESPN. Well, she was an anchor for her own show. She had been very outspoken about 45 and his interference with the NFL, and just his general demeanor as being incredibly offensive to people of color and anyone who identifies as a minority. And that relationship with ESPN is lost. And we can talk about the male privilege that's afforded to other people on ESPN that were just as vocal, or the male privilege or the white privilege that was afforded to some of her colleagues who got away with saying certain things. But of course, that same thing was not extended to her. And one of the things that she said on the show called Highly Questionable, she was doing a guest spot, is she kind of brought up the question, when do black people get to not be gracious? When do black folks get to not, if you do something offensive to a black person or to anyone really, right, there's going to be some sort of feeling about it. Why does it always have to be gracious? And so there is this way in which I think society just demands that black folks in general, you're not supposed to be too angry, because then you're the angry black man or an angry black woman. If you're an angry black man, you're a threat. If you're an angry black woman, you're just really, really disruptive, and you're supposed to be more submissive. So I think that happens cross-gender. I think it happens doubly so for black women.
Yeah, and I think it's because specifically with black people that there may be a belief with certain individuals, most likely racist individuals, that we should just be happy to be here and be out in chains.
Yeah, right.
So why don't you tone it down? You should just be happy to be invited to America. You're not even slaves anymore. You haven't been slaves for years. Chill out. What's the problem? Why don't you just put on a big old Sambo smile to make me feel comfortable? Right. And even with the anchor that you're talking about, that gets into the gender stereotype occupation, because her occupation is an occupation that normally women would have, right?
Right.
With the anchor and the position that she's in.
So it's tolerated less for her to be outspoken, because there probably is this kind of gendered stereotype and discriminatory perspective that, well, you're an anchor on ESPN, you're black, oh, and you're a woman. So there's always been this tone, I think, no matter where we go, of keeping people in their place, especially a person of color, but also obviously women as well.
Yeah, and it comes to different positions like medical professionals and like the crap that women used to get when it came to going to medical school or even being able to go to college. Right. I mean, what was it back in the day? Like to even get a credit card or a mortgage or to purchase things, you had to get your husband's permission.
Yeah.
What if you weren't married? Then you had to get your dad's, actually. If you weren't married and you were trying to get something on credit or anything like that, you had to get your dad's permission.
Wow.
Grown women.
Wow.
Like, that's even if you were allowed into the building, because that is more so based off of the difficulties of being like white women, like with black women wouldn't even be allowed in the store. So that's a whole different aspect of like the whole stereotype and like with the genders and everything that has to do with the different aspects of how we're supposed to express ourselves.
I think there's a general, and you touched on this, Raquel, I think there's a general lack of empathy in particular for black women that goes far beyond that of black men. And I say that as a black man because I've seen black women struggle with this, but also I think I've seen black men ignore the unique struggles of black women, and even though much of my identity and the identity of other black men are very much shaped by the oppression that we feel as black people, there is still a male privilege that is attributed to us. And for example, black men are allowed to be assertive without being called bitches or bossy or any sort of negative adjective. Black men are allowed to be self-confident in a way that isn't apologetic and are I think, more received in that way than are black women, even though it may not be fully received. And there are things that we can talk about, that we can say. There are times when as men, we speak up and we're heard way sooner than a woman is heard.
And different topics. Like, have you ever walked down the street and had some woman tell you to smile?
I have not.
I get that all the time. Like, it's ridiculous.
It's like your mood is for my pleasure only.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's for. Even like different topics like sex. Men are allowed to talk openly more so about sex than women. Like the whole aspect of like women being more sexually empowered and wanting to own their own sexuality, that's a whole issue. Like that's something that looks like it's supposed to be just way modern when it shouldn't have to be. Like men and women are sexual creatures. But if women have the same amount of sexual partners as men, they're a slut. Men can have as many sexual partners and they're a pimp. An older man who's not married, he's a bachelor. Older woman who's not married, she's a spinster. Like, and these are just different stereotypes and expectations for men versus women. Like just linking up with a man or finding a man who wants to be with you or something like that. That shows that you've made it.
I think furthermore, like the men's bodies aren't criticized to the same degree. Recently, there was a discrepancy in tennis, not involving Serena, but there was a white female player. I don't remember her name. The sports bra thing? Yeah, but she changed shirts while on the court. She was facing the wall. Bra. Yeah, she was facing the wall, and not that she should have to, but she was like penalized or fined, or there was some sort of issue that the referee had to bring to her attention. I mean, and there are literally hundreds of examples of men changing clothes while on the court. There have also been critiques about how women just in general present themselves in a room full of men. If you're a woman in a male-dominated industry, right, you're expected to be a certain way and dress a certain way. Whereas in men, the cultural naturally, I think, shifts to your benefit, where you can have a little bit more comfort and a little bit more freedom in your choice of dress.
Yeah, or just being told that you are like aggressive if you try to say something a certain way versus being assertive. And I do get my personality comes off as aggressive sometimes, but when I'm in like a business aspect, most of the time that's not the case. I really think it's just the fact that it's my Black female self asserting that I don't agree with something, that you may think that we have certain roles and that I shouldn't be speaking up for something.
Right.
As a whole, like,
disagreement from women is tolerated to a way lesser degree than disagreement from men.
Yeah, because we're emotional. We get emotional.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Or really, probably what it is. I mean, I think it's probably what it is like most women have a healthier sense of their own emotion or more in touch with their own feelings than men are, because men are, again, like, those emotions are very much ridiculed out of us at such an early age that we don't really know how to relate, and we equate emotion. Most men often equate emotion to illogical, to unuseful, irrational, erratic. It's not based in any sort of truth. It's just emotion.
And it's dismissive when you make statements like that.
Of course. Well, it's also gaslighting, right? Because when men say things like, "Oh, she's crazy," or I think that's the main one, or
yeah, that's the main one.
Yeah, that's I was like, I couldn't even think of another one. Or she's crazy. What you're really saying is that, like, she's just making something up out of thin air. And what we know as social scientists is that's just not how our emotions work. Emotion are very, like, visceral responses to real things that involve both a psychological and biological component. And of course, you don't pick your emotions. So I get frustrated in general with the idea that women can't be mad. And it's like, if you were by so many things in society told to be submissive, to be quiet, to not inconvenience anyone, to make yourself small, don't speak up, don't be too loud, don't be too this, don't be too that,
and take care of everyone while you do it,
I'd be pretty angry.
I'd be pissed.
I mean, and that has always been my thought about the gender norm of women, and Black women in particular. That, I mean, if you see a Black woman that's mad, she's probably got a million things to be mad about.
And that's why we're so loud, because we were silenced for so long that we will not be silenced anymore. Not
every Black woman is mad, Raquel.
No, I said silence. You mean not every Black woman is loud?
Uh-huh.
No, I'm just mad loud.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like, I mean, you loud, but it's cool.
Everybody in my family's loud. If you're not loud, you don't get hurt.
Yeah,
you won't eat.
Well, that's another thing, right? But that's another thing, like, right? So, I mean, in so many ways, like, that's an adaptive response.
It is.
I mean, isn't anger and being more vocal an adaptive response to being muted and told to be submissive and to suppress how you feel?
Yeah, it's always adaptive. Like, a lot of our behaviors that we have were the result of our experiences. So some of the behaviors can be adaptive, like, and more positive. Like, for example, your body is so used to you waking up at 7:00 a.m. that you wake up at 6:58. That's a great adaptive process. Sure. But a maladaptive one can be you're so used to being silenced, or so used to things like escalating quickly that you already, like, tying up your sneaks and putting on Vaseline because you're just already expecting a fight, because this is just how you react to stuff.
Taking off your earrings, all
that. So, like,
right.
there can be things that are adaptive, and there are things that are maladaptive, and mal means bad. Like, right. You're a result of your experiences.
Right.
And also your parents' experiences, because your parents passed, like, the way that they act towards you.
Right, they hand it down. Right. Just by virtue of modeling, but also, again, as I said before, just kind of how psychology develops. It develops in tandem with your own, like, temperament and genetic vulnerabilities, and in tandem with that and nature, the people that you interact with. I mean, the other thing that I was just going to point out is that I think on the flip side of some of these things, right? On the flip side of some of these things, when it comes to men and the gender norm and the gender expectation that we be strong, that we be independent, that we wouldn't feel anything that indicates that we've been impacted by other people, right? We're these kind of islands that are of solitude that kind of just take on everything. I think it, in some ways, it does kind of contribute to this sense of entitlement and fragility, male fragility. I think so many men are so ashamed to feel, so ashamed to be hurt, so ashamed to be impacted, that even when they're impacted just a little bit, it completely shatters their idea of being a man.
Yeah.
It completely handicaps their sense of confidence and sense of self-worth. Just to admit that they were hurt just a little bit, it feels like their world is crumbling. And so it actually, this idea that men have to be strong and emotionless actually contributes to a sense of fragility where we're not allowed to feel, be hurt, or be impacted by anything. And obviously, that's not the way that life works.
No, but you know what else? That aspect that makes me think of like relationships, like romantic relationships, and how gender norms can that can be a struggle in relationships. If you have certain expectations about what the male should do or what the female should do, and you don't fully agree with them, then you're kind of in for a battle, right? Because if say like the female is more assertive and you don't expect that from a female, right? Like say you're expecting her to be more docile to you, and she's a good person, but you guys keep butting heads, or like domestic responsibilities, like, oh, I expected you to wash the dishes. Oh, what a coincidence, I expected you to wash the dishes. Like just because of, like what, just expectations and like that in relationships, and you may not know where the underlying concern is coming from, right? Like you just think that this person is just being like difficult, but it could be that like something about you could be threatening some aspect of the other person. Yeah. Like something about, like to an ego aspect, like something about you being more assertive, and something about you being more independent in a relationship, and something about you being more willing to take things on and be like, oh, you don't need to fix it, I already fixed it. That can threaten one aspect of the person. Like it can threaten the ego of the man, because that's where their identity is, right? It's on being the macho and not having to do this. Right, so that can cause an issue within the relationship. Like a lot of times you don't know what you're triggering in that person. And it goes both ways. Like if women are like, oh, why don't you express yourself more? Or, why don't you talk more? Why don't I know how you're feeling? I just always think that's a big ask. And it's something that you have to, because all you really need in a relationship is effort. You need more, but you need effort, right? Because like you need effort shows that if I do something wrong and I tell you that you hurt my feelings, you're not going to blow me off. You're going to be like, well, can you explain it to me? Because I'm willing to work on it. Because that's the effort piece, right? So you really need effort. So I don't need to understand. Like, I don't need to totally agree with how you're feeling, but I can acknowledge it, right? So if you're dealing in a relationship where the norms are like knocking back and forth and you're not putting forth the effort to understand it, or if you're dealing with a man who is like difficulty expressing his feelings and you're not putting in the effort to try to like explain what you mean by like, what do you mean by feelings? I said I was mad or sad, or like, like you're going to butt heads. I think, and a lot of times I saw something with Tia and Tamara on Black Love, Tia and Corey, about Black love, and they were like, they don't have gender norms in their relationships. That's why it works. Like sometimes he's cooking dinner, sometimes she's cooking dinner, because that's like a domestic gender norm. Sometimes like he's taking care of the baby, sometimes she take care of the baby, and they said it works because they just kind of, it's like it's kind of it's whatever. It's like it's whatever we need to do to like get the job done. Right. But I think gender norms are also like really tied with ego. Yeah. And I think there's nothing more dangerous than threatening the ego, especially a man, because like even when someone tries to talk to like me or anyone like that, or a female or something like that, I'd always try to be polite, because if not, I could be killed. Like there was a woman in Philly who she was married, had a child, turned a guy down, got killed. Like, so you can't, like, I cannot threaten your ego. And gender norms to me are, when it comes to the male aspect, is an ego thing. It's like, this is where your power is. So if I damage your ego, I could die. Yeah. Like, that's scary.
So much truth. Yeah. I wonder if we could just like take apart like that example that you gave, like a woman turning down a man and then dying, which, by the way, is absolutely not uncommon.
No, I'm always afraid when I'm like, oh, no, thank you, I appreciate it, no, thank you, and then I walk and hope like the person isn't following me, because I'm like,
well, and we also know domestic violence, right, is often perpetuated by the man. And it's that the frequency of domestic violence, I mean, goes up like multiple times over when that man works a job where he has a high level of authority and power. In particular, with police officers, I think it's a few hundred times more prevalent, domestic violence is, with male police officers than it is in the regular population. And I'll have to double check that statistic. Yeah. But I know that it's more, I know that this idea of like power and control and domestic violence and the male ego in the mix of that absolutely contributes to the way that women are treated. And just to share like a brief story, I had a good buddy of mine fellow psychologist who I won't share his identity, but he knows who he is, and he's probably listening. You
know who you are.
You know you are. You know you are. He was in a session with his own therapist, and he was saying that he was just thinking about both he and his therapist do a lot of work with men around issues of masculinity. And he was just kind of like openly venting about how for men, anxiety is often expressed as anger, because you're not allowed to feel anxious or worried or concerned about anything. So it just comes out as anger. And his therapist responded to him, yeah, there are a lot of dead women.
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that I think a lot of times in domestic violence situations, there is a man who identifies himself as this very toxically masculine, overly strong and powerful person, and that anything less than that, as you put it, Raquel, is completely threatening to who he is as a person. And his anxiety about feeling obliterated, or his ego getting diminished, or the woman leaving him because he doesn't feel any sort of power without her being underneath him, gives him so much anxiety that it just comes out as rage. Yeah. And so for a lot of men, our anxiety often gets expressed as anger in this very, very controlling way. And it has so much to do with how we're raised, the gender norms, the expectation of men to be strong, controlling, dominant, and our sense of self-worth being very much wrapped around that. And then on the other end, for women, right, being on the other side of that, Raquel, you talked about it being so important for you to be polite to a man so that he doesn't
knock me out.
Right.
Like, for real.
express that anger, assault you, kill you, like do anything that would harm you. Like, what came to my mind is this idea of like how that happens in really, really small ways. For example, like, if women are expected to be completely submissive and completely selfless and just take care of everyone, the flip side of that is not being able to ask for the things that you need for self. The flip side of that is always feeling like a burden, like you're constantly inconveniencing somebody just by existing, just by being a person with needs that you didn't create in the first place. But by pursuing those needs even, or just by needing something, by just being a human, really, it brings up this sense of anxiety because you then have to request something from someone or infringe on somebody, quote unquote, or just need someone to do something for you. And that tendency or that behavior to not ask for the things that you need, that's a trauma response.
Yeah, and it's rampant in the community, which, like, as you said last episode, doesn't make it, just because everyone is suffering doesn't mean no one is suffering.
Yes.
Like, just because everyone is suffering from this concern doesn't mean no one is. And especially, with that, like, I just had an incident when I was at Carabana where I was walking away. I didn't know men still grab people, but he, like, grabbed me. And it was a big dude, like, grabbed my arm like Depot. And I was like, oh, nope, I'm married. And he was like, well, you out here? I was like, yep, still trying to go. And he was actively pulling me.
Raquel, that's terrible.
And it was scary as fuck. I'm like, well, this is the end. Like, we're around all these people. And then eventually he let go. But it was because my other two friends who were walking ahead of me were just like, hey, man, like, why do you... They had to, like, gang up. And then one of them had to... My one friend was just like, to his friend, like, hey, can you get your man? Like, this is crazy. And that's when he let go. Not because of my friends, because my friends talked to his friends.
And he listened to the guy.
And he can listen to them. Like, it's just... It's always concerning. I always say, like, women, you shouldn't have to try to be respectable about that. But, I mean, it could be your life. And with police officers, I always wonder, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Mm-hmm. Like, is it that people go into the police force and then they become more aggressive? Or is it that the aggressive people go into the police force?
Is it just sublimated and they just take their desire for anger or control? Not that all police officers have that desire, but particularly the ones who have a passion and a vulnerability for that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Is it just kind of, sublimated, or does it happen after?
I think we're going to need a part 2 of this.
I think so too. There's so much more, I think, to dissect. I mean, I think there's more to be said about male entitlement and male fragility. I think there's more to be said for, in particular, like Black women. And I think what often happens for so many Black women, again, is this like this discomfort with asking for things that you need or taking care of self. That's very, very much, I think, taught at such an early age because of the expectations of the woman.
Yeah. So stay tuned because we're going to do a part 2.
I think so for sure. And we were worried about having enough of a discussion, I think.
You were worried.
I was.
I was like, I'm sure you'll have plenty to say. Because we always do. We're very lengthy people.
We are long-winded. Well, thank you for listening, guys.
Thank you for listening. Tune in everywhere you can find a podcast and leave reviews and all that. Have a good day, night, all that.
Take care. See you next week.